This video is to hold me accountable and is also quite inspired by some other videos I've seen on BookTube, like Shannon from 155 Books Intimidating Reads. The thing is, I'm bad at reading the things I actually own. Seeing as we have just stepped into spring, one of my goals this season is to actually read the books on my bookshelves before purchasing any more. To say goodbye to winter, on the right you can see the process of a commission from my darling friend Susie from Susie Sherbert, which she asked for as a gift for her lovely mum. The only exception I will make for this is if I want to buy a physical copy of Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood, which is the read for this month for Briar's Book Club, which is run by my angel Anna from Meet Me at Midnight. The first book on the list is The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. Anna gifted me the first book in the Folk of the Air series, The Cruel Prince, for Christmas, and I put it off reading for one reason or another. I had Wilstathon to keep up with, I didn't want to start another series while I was in the middle of a trilogy, until March, when I devoured it. Within minutes of finishing the first book, I had ordered the second, which I subsequently also demolished, and tried to stave off from purchasing the third, if for nothing else the sake of my wallet, but now owning two of the series, it felt uncomfortable, wrong even, not to have the last in the trilogy, at least, on my shelves. I have a sneaking suspicion that the moment I am allowed to buy books again, the first book will be How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories. At the time I had filmed this, I had not read it because, once again with YA, I'm about 8 years behind everyone else. So for those who, like me, were many years too late, the Folk of the Air series follows a mortal girl, Jude, who was raised in fairyland by the fairy who sired her older sister and murdered her mother and father. Amongst her peers, she is reviled for her mortality. Life in fairy court is riddled with murder, sex and violence. Jude has little power, but she's ambitious, and soon the old king intends on abdicating, throwing the whole court into disarray as to who will rule next. Now, if you want to avoid spoilers for the first and second book, skip to the time code on the screen, because I will just briefly discuss my thoughts on those. For everyone else who's here, hi! I regret not starting this series the moment it was in my hands. I'd read some Holly Black prior to picking up this series, but I had only consumed her middle grade fiction. Her writing style is super accessible and fun. I adored the world building and the contrast between this brutal, beautiful world of fairy and the blunt narration by Jude. I had absolutely no hope in the first book of supporting the relationship between Jude and Cardan, but by the middle of book 2 I was totally swept up in it. When I was chatting about it with Liv, I referred to it as the Twilight I never had. The relationship is, from start to finish, toxic as fuck. You would not encourage these people to be together in real life, but you aren't there explicitly for their love story. The romance is so inherently tangled up with the politics and the world of the book that you can't extract one from the other, which I really appreciated. I also felt that the diverting thing about their relationship was that they were equally toxic and awful to each other. Neither was victim or victor over the other, just a long series of tricks and betrayals that meant even when everything seemed fine, you were always on your toes. As with any enemies to lover story, there is a palpable chemistry, but it really carries off. I will probably discuss my thoughts on this series as a whole at some point, but I can't waffle on forever about this just yet, so I'll move on. The next book on my list is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. As you can see, I've made a little progress on it so far. It follows Toru Watanabe as he reflects on his life and his first love, Naoko, and how it all went horribly wrong. If I'm honest, I knew nothing about this book before picking it up in September. It's one of those books that for years has been catching my eye in Waterstones, primarily because of the absolutely striking cover art, and so I did very much judge a book by its cover. So far it seems deeply invested in nature and politics, juxtaposing liminal rural spaces with messy metropolitan ones with deeply complex networks of relationships and the universal slovenly student living experience. As far as I've delved into it, it also has some very loaded imagery, with a lot of care taken to impress the importance of the flag, the war, and divided national identity based on political ideology and class in Japan. All as set pieces to a series of Toru's formative relationships. But honestly, what can I say? I've only read a couple of chapters. Book 3 is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which was gifted to me on my 21st birthday by my auntie Kath, and I am now 23 and still haven't read any Virginia Woolf. It seems a bit daft to call myself a feminist and not having read a single one of her books, so I am promising myself that I will at least read it. As far as I understand it, A Room of One's Own is a collection of non-fiction essays using fictional aesthetics in order to discuss womanhood and the patriarchy, which honestly sounds so up my street. I'm just a little intimidated by the fact that she's an acclaimed feminist author. What if I don't follow what she has to say? Or, like a lot of feminist thought from the 1920s and 30s, what if it's painfully dated? It is so beloved, and what if I don't love it? Especially because non-fiction will always be a bit more difficult for me to read, but it is something that I think is necessary to my growth as a person, so I am promising myself that I will read this. My fourth choice is A Little Life by Hanya Yaganahara. Everyone and their mother has recommended this book to me. I have not seen a single bad review of this book, even down to the day I picked it up, where the guy at the bookshop told me that he loved it. All I know is that it follows a group of friends in New York traversing young adulthood and then adult life, and that it makes everybody, absolutely everybody who reads it, cry. Naturally, I love crying, so I had to, but then Anna was so stressed about reading it that I contracted secondhand stress, and I have been putting it off ever since. But this is a rubbish excuse not to read something you might love, so I refuse to put it off any longer. Book number 5 is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I have been hearing about forever since I was around 14, when it was recommended to me by my cousin. There was some discourse on our Discord server around it, in that it features some scenes featuring minors and some compromising situations, so if I get uncomfortable, I'm giving myself the option of DNFing this, but for the sake of my younger self, I will at least give it a try. My understanding of this is that it's a friends to lovers story between Patroclus and Achilles from their youth until the Trojan War. As an adult who is catching up on their YA fiction, this is required reading, but I am interested to see how these tropes pan out for me, because until more recently I was only invested in romantic literature, not romance in literature. I remember the thing I was most frustrated by when I first read His Dark Materials, for example, was the amount of time spent on the relationship, but looking back there wasn't even all that much. So I am holding myself accountable, and I'm going to read this bloody book. Book number 6 is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardina Evaristo, which I was given for Christmas, but there was a mix-up between my mother and I because it had been incorrectly labelled, and she got it, but it was meant for me, so I got it quite late. I think this one has been passed over as much as it has because I've been doing an awful lot of shorter books by one author and collections of shorts in February, and I wanted to have a couple more sustained long books before I read another collection of shorts. But then I found myself inhaling Giant Days again recently, and I realised that if I can complete my reading challenge with a Giant Days addiction alone, then I can definitely read the book on my bookshelf. The 7th book on my list is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower, which is another one of those books which has taunted me every time I went into Waterstones. I'm more inclined to buy secondhand when I can, and I will take pictures of titles that intrigue me in chain bookshops to purchase later from small businesses. But I could never find this elsewhere because I hadn't found bookshop.org yet. So in October I finally let myself buy this from the bookshop, and I have not picked it up. It appears to be a magical realist story about a merchant, Mr. Hancock, potentially discovered a mermaid. I don't know why I haven't read this. I wrote my dissertation on magical realism. It's one of my favourite genres. It feels like seafaring folktale, which is another one of those genres that just scratches the inside of my skull. If I'm honest, it's probably because I deeply dislike the sprayed edge. And that's a rubbish reason not to read something. Book number 8 is Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. A great many of my friends are very into musical theatre, and one of my favourites is Cabaret, but if the cast and director are not informed and don't have Jewish representation, then it can quite often be anti-Semitic and lacks the irony of the oppressed group mocking the impressions and behaviours of the oppressor. This is often unintentional, but there are many occasions where it's not. As we saw with Charlottesville in 2017 and with other neo-Nazi groups, things that have the intent of criticising the Nazis are often appropriated by them as hate symbols and dog whistles. I'm speaking in particular about Tomorrow Belongs to Me, which in the musical is meant to be a troubling representation of how white people become radicalised by fascist ideology, but then became a chant during the alt-right march. What's more is that Isherwood is noted to have had been a vicious anti-Semite, and so I picked this up to further understand the source material, to understand if the problem with Cabaret comes from the author or the adaptation. Also, seeing as he died in 1986, I'm not funding an anti-Semite. Book 9 is The Irresistible Fairy Tale by Jack Sipes, which I put on my wishlist as a research reference for a secret project that I'm working on with a couple of friends, which I'm sure I will mention later at some point on this channel. I got this for my birthday and I put it off because even on the first page it sparked debate in my family, which I wasn't ready for, about some, to my mind, quite insensitive language, which turned out to be a quote from another author, but it still made me quite uncomfortable. This is another that if I find it to be distasteful, I'm giving myself the option to DNF. Up next is A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, and this actually isn't my copy. This belongs to my mother, but I only know that because when I found it on the bookshelves, I found her plane ticket from what looks like 25 years ago inside. She had made it a significant way through and she'd given up just before she finished, which is heartbreaking for her. A couple of months ago, whilst locking down, we watched a good amount of the series on BBC iPlayer together, and I thought that it was such an enrapturing story with funny but tragic characterization that when I found the book, I had to snatch it off the shelves and read the book before I watched the rest of the series and ruined it for myself. From what I remember of the series, as it has been a while, like Norwegian Wood and A Little Life, it's one of those rare coming-of-age stories set at university age, about a girl called Latta in the 1960s and her complex relationship with her family as both she and her mother tried to find her a suitable boy. My 11th choice is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which was sold to me on the prospects of sapphics and high fantasy, and I knew absolutely nothing else about it, so I did some cursory research to try and avoid spoilers. It seems to follow political upheaval surrounding a line of succession in a queendom and dragons, which already piqued my curiosity. But while I was snooping on Goodreads, I noticed that Samantha Shannon had commented that this story has more tales to tell, which automatically intrigued me further. I am an absolute slut for world building. Give me a magic system with consistent but complex logic and a variety of cultures with rich lore and history any goddamn day. Give me languages, give me food, give me music, let me make Pinterest boards and Spotify playlists and experiment with recipes and absolutely fall in love with the world. The only thing stopping me is it's so goddamn long. It's a commitment of a book, but there are so many things I wanted to read as well that I could potentially finish faster. But if I had had that logic as a kid, I would never have read Lord of the Rings, and it is the best book, Anna. The penultimate item on my TBR is The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly, which has been sitting at the back of my consciousness for years. I first heard about it during my A-levels in an English literature class where a friend of mine was writing her coursework on it. I deeply trusted her judgment because that year she bought me my all-time favourite collection of short stories for my birthday, and I assume we have similar tastes. As with many of these things, I bought it completely blind in September when I had no internet. I had every intention of reading it, but it was lost under my Halloween reading, and then I went home for Christmas and I couldn't come back for 3 months. So, dear viewer, it is entirely up to you if this counts as procrastination. All I know is that it follows a misanthropic child through potential madness or potential fantasy, and that my friend was comparing it to The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a personal favourite, but not something I could have read this year for reasons. However, it's also given me a strong vibe akin to The Starless Sea, which could be my favourite book of the year so far. As of yet, I'm undecided, so I'm hopeful going into this. And finally, before I'm allowed to buy any more books, I have to read 1,000 Splendid Suns. I watched and read The Kite Runner when I was probably too young to really understand what was going on, but I absolutely adored it anyway. And for some reason, I kept on returning to that story, and then my love for it returned when I subsequently watched Cartoon Saloon's The Breadwinner in my first year of university and had to binge them both again. But I've never read anything else by Khaled Hosseini, and that's actually shocking, seeing as how much I love The Kite Runner. Actually time to expand my media consumption rather than just consuming it on repeat until I'm sick of it. Once again, I know very little about it, and the blurb was little help if I'm honest. It's set against the backdrop of the last 30 years of Afghanistan, and that there's something about family in there. Is that going to put me off? Fuck no. I'd love to know if there's any books you've been putting off, and if anyone wants to commit to reading a certain section of their bookshelf before they buy any more with me. I'd love to know what you're committing to in the comments. Also, here is the commission. Here is the drawing that I done did. And this is my official goodbye winter, fuck off. I never want to be cold ever again. Commission work is some of my favourite work that I do on a day-to-day basis, but it's not the only thing I do. I also run an Etsy shop, which I have just recently opened after having worked on my own website for a year, wanting to try out something new. Completely rebranded, working with an entirely new set of pieces, and I'm going to be slowly rolling those out over the next few months, as well as the secret project. So if you liked anything that I did at all today, I would really appreciate it if you could just nip over to my Etsy shop, link in the description, like and subscribe if you want. I don't know what I'm doing anyway.